All right, let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the Taisho period from 1912 to 1926. Okay, so last time we talked about the Meiji reforms or the Meiji Restoration that totally transformed Japan from a traditional society into a modern power, the very first non-Western power that successfully transformed itself. So, as we mentioned before, Japan was the only non-Western society that modernized itself. There are many explanations. So the Japanese witnessed this huge success the country has achieved. But on the other hand, there's also a sense of humiliation and insecurity. There's a very strong sense of humiliation and insecurity surrounded Japanese culture during this time. Okay, um, a hot debate going on at the time is: does modernization equal westernization? Based on Japan's success, there seems to be an equation mark. Right? That means to become successful, to become modernized, to become industrialized, you have to embrace the West. You have to learn everything the West has done. Right. So in that case, modernity equals westernization. But on the other hand, many Japanese they don't think that's right. Okay, because they realize that their modernization experience starts with being bullied by the West, being humiliated by the West. So a lot of so at the same time, when a group of Japanese like a Fukuzawa uh, promoting westernization. On the other hand, there are some other groups of Japanese who say, no, we need to keep our Japanese spirit, Japanese soul. We're different from the West. Okay, modernization doesn't equal uh, westernization. Okay, we can learn sciences, technology, math, military technologies from the West on one hand, but on the other hand, we can continue to be Japanese. We can keep our Japaneseness. So we cannot abandon our Japanese identity. For example, Fukuzawa may say, "Hey, Shintoism is full of a superstition." Okay, and Buddhism, you can look at that. There's nothing that can be scientifically proved. Okay, we should abandon that. Fukuzawa would make that argument. But some other Japanese would say, "No, no, no. Shintoism is great. Buddhism is great. Okay, because they made us Japanese. Okay, this is how this is what distinguishes us from the rest of the world. So a lot of the Japanese intellectuals are trying to search for a modern Japanese soul. Okay, for example, there's one professor in economics called Nitobi Inazo. Okay, Nitobi Inazo. He's born in Japan, grew up in Japan, but he traveled. He received a PhD degree in United States, and he of course traveled extensively in United States, so he know this country. And then at the turn of the century, we're talking about it around 1900. I think it's 1899. He authored this book called Bushido, the Soul of Japan. Bushido, the Soul of Japan. Okay, Bushido means the way of warriors, the way of warriors, the honor code of warriors. In this book, Nitobi Inazo made an argument saying Bushido is the soul of Japan. If you want to have Japan, the essence of Japanese civilization or culture is Bushido. And what is Bushido? He identifies trends three intellectual trends that form Bushido. That is Shintoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. So in other words, even Bushido is a hybrid, according to Nitobi Inazo. And Nitobi Inazo also argues that for modern Japan, um, everyone really should get exposed to Bushido. I mean, every Japanese must really understand Bushido to become a Japanese. If you want to find Japaneseness, you have to find it in Bushido. And he even compares Bushido to the chivalry the honor code for knights in medieval Europe. He says it's the same thing. Okay, it's the same thing. That's the way Bushido is what makes us Japanese. Everybody should learn from this. But this is a myth. This is a myth. Nitobe Inazo's understanding of Bushido is totally a myth because based on our discussion of traditional Japan in the past lectures, we know that only less than 10% of the Japanese can actually become a bushi or samurai. Okay, bushi in this case simply means samurai. Um, how can you calm the honor code of less than 10% of a population, the soul of your country, right? So Nitobe Inazo here is certainly his inventing a tradition. He's fabricating a myth about the Japanese culture, right? And if you look at the Japanese Imperial Army, although in modern time, if you look at Imperial Japan, we're talking about from Meiji Restoration to the end of World War II, right? This time period is called Imperial Japan. Yes, Japan maintained a large army, a large military force, and almost everyone in Japan's large military force thought they were modern samurai. Okay, so samurai culture or Bushido is the myth that Japanese military servicemen uh, give themselves during World War II. This is why they fight so hard, right? They thought they were Bushido, they were Bushi or samurai, but this is a myth. This is a myth, invented by people like Nitobe Inazo. Because we know that most of the Japanese Imperial Army soldiers, their ancestors are not a samurai. They're not a samurai. And according to the real samurai system, most of them can never become samurai. So in other words, they when samurai, the social class, is gone, almost all Japanese men thought they were samurai. This is totally a romanticized myth, okay? But people buy the myth. They believe in the myth because the intellectuals, like Nitobe Inazo's promotion or advertisement. When a myth is repeated so many times, it almost becomes truth because everybody believes it. But the myth will burst in one day, right? Bushido, the soul of Japan. So it's a typical myth. Let me ask you this question: what is the soul of the United States? Can anyone find out what's the soul of the United States? Please, just tell me what you think. If everyone is asked the question, what is the soul of America? What is that? Anyone?
Guess some would say maybe the republicanism of the Constitution.
Okay, okay. Republicanism of the Constitution. Everybody agree? What else?
I was going to say the concept of more. We always want to advance something. We always want more. We always want to do something different.
Okay,
And I think that's something that is seen across any political party. And in fact, that's what our Constitution is doing. It's just giving us
okay,
more
okay.
freedom.
The desire for more. Okay, some other people mentioned freedom. Okay, and okay. Any other answers? Any other answer?
I think Jesse has a good one in the comments.
Okay, okay. Can anyone read that to us? Can anyone help us to read that? What is that?
They just say freedom, which I think is good.
Okay, okay. So the soul of America is freedom. Okay. Is there anyone disagree with that? I mean, this is a small class, but last time when I taught this class, when I give this lecture in the larger class, I got all kinds of answers. Some of your classmates strongly disagree that freedom is actually the soul of America. Yeah. Anybody thought a hamburger is the soul of America? Or football, basketball, I don't know, Christianity, or science, or whatever. See, there could be all kinds of answers, and they're all different. They're all different, because in the end, we'll probably find out that 100 people would have 100 answers to what is the soul of America. We don't know what that is. We don't know what that is. America is so complicated. It defies any definition like that, right? Any definition like that. If you ask a liberal, a radical liberal, what is the soul of America? He'll probably say fascism, right? And if you ask a outright American, what is the soul of America? He will give you a completely different answer. This country right now is so deeply divided. So it's not surprising that you will get all kinds of answers. But my point is, perhaps there is no such thing like a soul of any nation. Because any nation, as large as Japan or America, is so complicated that you cannot define its soul, right? Right? The answer pretty much depends on who you ask, right? But here, in early 20th century, the Japanese are trying to solve this problem. They're trying to give a definitive answer to their citizens, right? People like Nitobe Inazo, they say, don't give us 1,000 answers as to what is the soul of Japan. There's only one answer, okay? Although it's a myth, doesn't matter. Although it's a modern tradition that is recently invented, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we need to have intellectual unity, okay? We need everyone to think in one way, okay? They don't want any dissidence. They don't want any different thought. This is why the imperial government is going to crack down any non-orthodox thought like communism, okay, or radical progressivism. Okay, all these thoughts that may criticize the imperial government are going to be cracked down, are going to be oppressed. Okay, so there's in other words, at the turn of the century, the Japanese are trying to invent a new tradition that fits the country. They're telling all kinds of myths to their people. Say, hey, Bushido is our soul. Although your ancestors are all ordinary farmers, they cannot be a samurai. It doesn't matter. Okay, join the army and you're the modern samurai. Actually, there is no samurai as a social class, but everyone becomes a samurai in Japan. So that's the irony of the history. Okay, so that's as part of the search for modern Japanese identity. Okay, they're still doing that. The Japanese are still doing that. Actually, if you ask today's Japanese, what is their soul? Okay, what is the soul of a Japanese nation? You probably will get all kinds of answers. We're talking about in 21st century. If you ask a Japanese young man, what is the soul of a Japanese culture? Okay, you probably get some answer like Pokemon. It could be Pokemon, right? Or it could be, I don't know, Godzilla, right? Or some kind of I don't know, all kinds of anything popular in Japan. So it's always changing. The so-called soul of any nation is always changing because it's a myth. It's a tradition it's invented tradition that's being consistently reconceived and reinterpreted, if that makes sense. Okay, so Shinto. The value of Shintoism was rediscovered. After Meiji Restoration, Shintoism was promoted to be the official national religion, and is combined with the cult of the emperor. So everybody worships the emperor, right? If someone says, I don't think the emperor is a living god, I don't want to worship him, you can't do that. Okay, you're in prison. You're in prison during this time. If you say that, okay. And of course, there's a lot of attempts to rediscover the Japanese aesthetics, traditional Buddhism, the way of a sword, way of arranging flowers, even tattoo, right? And all these attempts, all these efforts serve one purpose, that is to redefine or rediscover the Japanese uniqueness. The Japanese want to see themselves as very unique, as exceptional. We're different from all the other countries, right? If you look at American culture, we do the same thing, right? We always try to prove that America is always an exception, right? And the Japanese do exactly the same thing in this time period. They want to prove that they are exceptional, okay? Because they're so amazed by their own achievements in modernization. Okay. So modernity for some Japanese is a problem. So some Japanese are trying to sort of criticize modernity. That means they don't think being modern is a good thing. Okay, um, so they want to try to solve a lot of problems brought upon by modernity. One answer is that they want to resist Western aggression by being aggressive themselves. Chauvinism, okay, or ultra nationalism or imperialism combined with the social Darwinism. All these isms Japan borrowed from the West serve one purpose, that is to make Japanese thought they are entitled to control or conquer East Asia, their neighbors, because they're better. They're special. They're exceptional. Okay, the Japanese believe that after Meiji Restoration, after all the great achievements they made during Meiji Restoration, they're the only one. They're the chosen to rescue East Asia, rescue their neighbors like Chinese, Koreans, Vietnamese, perhaps Thai, uh, from the the aggression of the West. Japan is self-identified as the rescuer of Asia. This is combined with the social Darwinism and the Chauvinism, and a lot of this is widely shared by many Japanese intellectuals and politicians. The belief is Japan's moral duty to assert its unique identity against the West. Right in the 1910s and 1920s, when Japan looked to the West, they saw spiritual pollution, right? And they don't want Japan, the traditional pure Japanese culture, to be contaminated by Western culture, right? For example, some Japanese thought, if you look at American culture, right, in the 1920s, American economy is great, it's booming, okay? The GDP is growing very fast uh, under the Coolidge, we call it the Coolidge prosperity, right? So, but Japanese thought this is not good. Okay, yes, on one hand, the Americans are developing their economy, but they're too selfish. Okay, they're too selfish. A lot of consumerism. Okay, a lot of individualism. They're so self-centered. They're the only purpose for Americans is to get more money, enjoy more happiness. That's too superficial. And they thought we Japanese are different. We want to sacrifice ourselves for common good, for our nation. At any moment, we are willing to die for our emperor. This made us morally superior than the Westerners. Because Westerners are just so contaminated by capitalism, consumerism, and individualism. Okay, they just want to indulge themselves into all kinds of material pleasures. But we Japanese are different. We're more spiritual. We're spiritually, morally superior to Americans. So there are many Japanese thought that way. Okay, so gradually more and more Japanese believe they should save Asia from Western imperialism. For example, during this time, we're talking about the first 20 years in the 20th century. China was struggling. Okay, Korea has already turned into a Japanese colony, but China is struggling. The big empire collapsed in China in 1911, but the republic was not as fully established in China. There was a lot of warlords are fighting with each other. It's a terrible chaos, anarchy, poverty, right? Social unrest. But Japan is so proud of themselves when they look at China, right? So they thought it's their moral duty to help Chinese. And the way, okay, well, it's a quote unquote help, okay? The Japanese thought the way they could help China is to kick out all the Western powers' influences on China. For example, they would ask China to not hire any European advisors to help them develop the economy. Okay, in 1911, Japanese government sent a message to Chinese government saying, we can loan you some money, okay, but as a return, you must only hire Japanese as your political advisor, military advisor, or commercial advisor. You must not hire any Americans, British, French, Germans. You cannot, okay? So this is to make sure China becomes Japan's sphere of influence. This is part of something we call imperialism. Imperialism is quite popular in late 19th century and early 20th century. A lot of people at that time, they thought, as we mentioned last time, they thought the world is just like a jungle. Okay, it follows basic jungle rule. If one country is powerful enough, it's entitled to bully other countries, or at least ask other countries to do whatever they want. So Japan wanted to do the same thing, right? Japan already took Korea. Japan already took Taiwan. Japan already took Okinawa. So Japan wanted to have a control of the continent. That's something they ultimately want. So in 1915, that's the first step that Japan wanted to fulfill its expansionist, imperialistic ambition. Okay. All right. So when Emperor Meiji died, his son, this is Emperor Taisho. Emperor Taisho, Meiji Emperor's son, was enthroned. Emperor Taisho. This is a picture. Sometimes he takes picture in European style uniform, but sometimes he's in traditional clothing. Right. The modernization continues. Okay, social culture is still changing. You see this hybrid culture in Japan. It's a mixture of the old and the new. Right, Western style is coming in. Yeah, the most popular fashion, Vogue, popular in Paris, can be seen in Tokyo. Japanese women, they're very active in copying the latest European fashion, but mix them with some Japanese native elements. So you always see this hybrid culture. Okay. Yeah. At that time, there was an ideology called the Mito ideology. What this is basically a mixture of Confucian piety. So Confucianism, to a certain degree, revived after Meiji Restoration, and it's mixed with the Shinto myths. The purpose is to inculcate with the modern Japanese with a unique Japanese spirit, so that they are taught their moral duty is to save Asia from Western colonialism and imperialism and cultural contamination. Okay, so Japan wanted to kick the Westerners out of Asia and turn Asia into a Japan-controlled Asia. It's an imperialistic dream. Okay, imperialistic ambition. Okay, there is a slogan that is often put forward that is called the Great East Asian Sphere of Co-Prosperity. I'm sorry, there's a clumsy English translation, but this is what it means. The Great East Asian Sphere of Co-Prosperity aims to kick out all the white men and then rebuild Asia under Japanese leadership. So that's basically the purpose. And this ideology eventually led to World War II. Okay, you have to understand Japan's ideology, understand why World War II broke out in Japan. And Japan is at the center of the new Asian region. Okay, actually, throughout World War II, starting from the 1930s, Japan has always called World War II the Great East Asian War, aimed at saving Asia from the hands of the old European colonial power. Okay, so this is the emperor's family. This is Emperor Showa actually, but this shows that how militarized the culture, the modern Japanese culture has been. Right, every emperor would take picture in military uniform, including the later Showa emperor. Yeah. So the way for Japan to build a new Asia is going to be through military power. Okay, now let's look at the politics. Party politics continues. Okay, the liberal and the progressive parties in the lower house, they won the majority of seats in the lower house. Right, in 1890, they won 171 seats of the 300 seats of the lower house. This made sure these political parties to control the budget of the nation. Okay, although suffrage, and that means the right to vote, is only limited to 1% of the entire Japanese population. Okay, there's a lot of limitations like education. Right, if you're not educated enough, you cannot vote. Gender, If you're a woman, you cannot vote. Women could not vote until 1945 when World War II ended, when Americans forced Japanese to change their constitution. Only after that, Japanese women started to have suffrage. Tax brackets. If you don't pay enough tax, you cannot vote. So in the end, only 1% of the population could vote. So it's a very, very limited democracy. But popular movements are developing. Okay, people are active in participate in politics. They want to have their voices heard in the nation, right? So how do you make your voices heard? Right, media, newspaper, press, rallies, petitions, protests, right, demonstrations. You can do all this, and the Japanese did all this. So all kinds of social groups, social classes. They try to have their voice heard in Japan by all these popular movements. So in Taisho period, um, there was a pretty strong pro-democratic movement going on in Japan. When we look at Japan during World War II, you would think that this is almost like a fascist state. But in the 1920s, when Taisho emperor was there was a pretty strong tendency towards democracy. Well, part of the reason is because the emperor was a pretty weak emperor. Okay, Taisho emperor, his health was not very well. So he and on the other hand, he's not very interested in politics. And sometimes some people even thought he was almost like a retard. He's, for example, in a typical court meeting, when he was listening to the National Assembly or the Parliament, he would he would form the paper presented to him, the document paper presented to him. He would make a telescope with the paper, with the document paper, and he would use that telescope, the paper telescope, to look at the people surrounding him. So obviously he's absent-minded at most of the court meetings. He did not care about politics. See, this is the problem of the imperial system. Okay, because an emperor is different from a president, right? A president, after being elected, after going through all this campaign, of course, he's super passionate about politics, right? A president candidates want to rule the country. But the emperor becomes an emperor because of birth. Even if he's not interested in politics, he still has to do the job. So that's the problem of the imperial system, right? If you think about that. Taisho is typically one victim for such an imperial system. If he was not born as the oldest son in the imperial family, he probably would take on other jobs. I don't know what that is. It could be some kind of art jobs, or he would shoot a cinema perhaps, or paint paintings. But he was born as the throne prince, so he has to take up the position, no matter if he wants or not. So Taisho is a pretty weak emperor. But this gave Japan a great chance to develop democracy. Okay, a lot of intellectuals they believe that Japan should be ruled by something called public opinion. Okay, public or koran. That's the Japanese term, koran. That means public opinion. They believe that the government should hear what people are talking about, and what the majority people are talking about. That's the public opinion. Okay, that's the popular opinion of the people, and it should dominate. The popular opinion should dominate national policy making. Okay, and how do we find the public opinion? Well, we listen to the newspapers, media, rallies, petitions, protests. We want to hear the people's voice, and then we want to transform people's voices into national policy. So that's how we make sure koran, or public opinion, dominates Japanese policy. So in 1920s, you do see a very strong pro-democratic changes. Okay, so we call this a Taisho democracy. Okay, Taisho emperor ruled from 1912 to 1926. It's a short time period, but really democracy was developing. Okay, the lower house, as we mentioned before, the lower house consists of representatives elected by people, but the 1% of the population who have suffrage, right? And they were led by party leaders. The Japanese actually gave they gave a very limited democracy even to the colonies they conquered. For example, Taiwan. Taiwan has a very limited number of representatives. They could elect their representatives and then send it to Tokyo to speak for the Taiwanese people. But of course, it's highly controlled. It's not a standard democracy because the local Taiwanese voice is hardly heard by Tokyo. But on paper, if you look at the on the table, the Taiwanese as a colony people, they still have right to send representatives to Tokyo. So this is a part of the democracy that is tolerated by the Taisho administration. The upper house. The upper house consists of appointed members by the emperor. So there is no democracy there. This system is to make sure that the old samurai elites, political elites, still have a say in politics, right? Because the old samurai elites, they still surrounding the emperor, and the emperor would choose his the old aristocrats. Although they're not called samurai anymore, because the samurai class is gone. Okay, after the Meiji Restoration, but their influences are still there. The emperor could still choose the trusted political elites. Most of them are used to be samurai. The emperor could still choose these political elites to be to serve in the upper house, so they still have a lot of power. This is called the Genro group. They're the traditional political elites, right? And also the private council. The council to the emperor are still dominated by the old political elites. The ordinary people still have no say in there. And on top of that, the military is also independent. We talked about this. This is a very strange system in Japan because the military serves the emperor directly. Okay, because according to the Meiji Constitution, the sovereignty, that means the ultimate authority of the nation, is not in the hands of all the people in Japan. The sovereignty of Japan is the emperor. Okay, so this gave the military a very good excuse not to report to the civil government, but rather they thought they're the emperor's private army. Okay, but the emperor cannot take care of everything, right? Most of the time, the emperor have no idea what the army is doing, what the navy is doing. So the military pretty much enjoys a lot of independence. So, yeah, they're independent. Okay, in 1918, Harake, the Japan's first commoner, he became the prime minister. He's the very first Japanese prime minister that has a commoner background. All the prime ministers before him were all noblemen. Used to be samurai. Okay, there were social unrests, right? The Hibiya riots in 1905. This is a typical social protest. When people are unsatisfied with some social policies, they would launch a protest. Sometimes the protest could turn into a riot. Okay, for example, if you're not happy with the price of the rice, okay, price of rice is very important, right? You launch a riot. You launch a protest, which turned into a riot, and you storm the local rice stores, and then you just take the rice from the stores, because ordinary people thought that they were treated unfairly. Okay, their salary is too low, their income is too low. But then on the other hand, the grocery stores are raising their price. There's huge inflation. So in that case, people responded by launching riots, and they would storm all these grocery stores and restaurants and just take the rice because they want to feed themselves. It's very complicated. On one hand, the government thought this is a crime, but for a lot of party leaders and civil rights leaders. People had the right to do this. It's very complicated riots. Okay. Okay. Other conflicts in the society. Um, Disagreement over military budget. This is always a big problem for the Taisho period politics. Uh, the the conflict about the military budget happens in the lower house. Okay, because according to the constitution, if the army or the navy wanted more budget, this budget bill must be passed in the lower house. But the lower house is not controlled by the military. The lower house is controlled by civil party leaders. Okay, these are the representatives elected by people. So they normally don't wanna give too much money to the military, right? A typical party leader would say, uh, "Hey, we want to give more money to education. Okay, we want to allocate more money to improve people's living standards. Okay, instead of building more battleships or building more tanks, we don't want to do that. Okay, so the military always want more money from the lower house, but when their requests are thwarted, sometimes that could lead to assassination. The military would use simply violence, sheer violence to solve their problem. Okay. Uh, yeah. For example, in 1912, the Seiyukai Party leader Harake, who later became the prime minister, Harake forced the military into a stalemate in budget. So the military did not get what it wanted. Um, but later in the 1920s and 30s, the military would send assassins to assassinate all these civil ministers who dare to say no to the military. So Japanese politics pretty dangerous during this time period. Okay, uh, ordinary people demand lower price. They want a more public education. They want a more public transportation. They want to expand the suffrage. That means more people want to have the right to vote, and they want to limit the military budget so that the government can improve economy, use that money. So the ordinary people want a different thing. Okay, and then there was also socialist movement. A lot of socialist movements in Japan. The Friendly Society movement. Okay, we can only briefly mention all these. This is a social democratic party um, movement in 20th century. They want to work for the working class. Okay, they want to work for the working class. They want the government to allocate more benefits, more money to improve the lives of ordinary workers. The unions also, the workers' unions also are very powerful. Barakumin, this is the people who have a darker skin in Japan. In Tokugawa period, the so-called Barakumin, they normally are the debased people in the society who picked up a very lowly job like a garbage cleaners and other or beggars, right? So even in 20th century, the so-called Barakumin, they're still systematically discriminated against, right? Think about the Jim Crow law in United States. Okay, there was systematic discrimination against African Americans, right? Barakumin are like that. Okay, they're like that. They're discriminated against in the society in many senses, and but they still want to be treated equally. Okay, Barakumin wanted to be treated equally, so there were some political parties and organizations that helped them. So this is a part of the Taisho period social democratic movement. Okay.
I have a super quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
So since you kind of mentioned the Jim Crow laws, we talked about how the Japanese had slaves at a certain time period. When did they stop having them?
Okay. A quick answer. The so-called Japanese slaves are very different from the African American slaves that worked in the southern plantations before the American Civil War. Okay, very very different. Okay, the reason is because let's say Tokugawa Japan. Okay, in Tokugawa Japan, the society is highly hierarchical, right? I mean, if you look at America, pre-Civil War America, white men had a citizenship, so their rights are guaranteed by the Constitution, and their rights are equal to each other, except for African Americans. So African Americans were slaves. But if you look at the Tokugawa Japan, there was no such constitution that guarantees everyone's citizenship. Actually, there was no such concept like citizenship in Tokugawa Japan. The To a certain degree, even the samurai can be considered as a personal slave to their masters, if that makes sense, right? So you have to understand Tokugawa Japanese hierarchy, right? So the slaves, for the same reason, they're considered as personal property of samurais, right? So samurais are sort of like a personal property to the daimyo. If the daimyo want one samurai die, the samurai just cannot say no. So in that case, can you say the samurai is a slave to the daimyo? Well, to a certain degree, yes, he is, right? So that's how the so-called slaves to the samurai. That's how they are. Okay, that's how they are. So they're not typically the kind of the American slaves before Civil War, but the so-called slaves they do work for their masters. Okay, in the same way that a samurai work for daimyo. Okay, but this is not to say that the samurai would treat the slaves like like farm animals. They wouldn't do that. Sometimes the relationship between a slave to his samurai master could be pretty intimate. Just like the relationship between a samurai to a daimyo could be intimate. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, after Meiji Restoration, remember, according to Charter Oath, that's the decree issued by Emperor Meiji. Everyone is equal to each other. So those so-called slaves are freed after Meiji Restoration. So a quick answer is that. But they're still discriminated against, right? There's still discrimination within Japanese society, right? For example, discrimination against women. A lot of discrimination against the women. Even today, women are still discriminated against in job market systematically, right? The gender equality in Japan is one of the worst in the whole world, even in 21st century. And not to say the barakumin. Remember the barakumin who used to pick up lowly jobs in traditional society? They're still discriminated against. People would say, "Hey, your father or your grandfather used to be a barakumin, and you have darker skin. You're barakumin." And those barakumin are still discriminated against in the job market. Okay, and also not to mention the people from Okinawa. If you have Okinawa accent, everybody knows. Yeah, in Osaka, in Tokyo, people know that you're from Okinawa. There's still very subtle discrimination against you. Yeah, so don't think that Japanese society is a homogeneous. It's not homogeneous. Okay, there's a lot of conflicts within that society. It's just that Japanese use ritual to manage the social differences and the social conflicts better, perhaps better than other societies. So on the surface, it seems like the society is pretty harmonious, okay? But actually, it's not. It's not. There's a lot of conflicts. Okay, other conflicts. There are people in Japan who believe in anarchism. Anarchism. This is something imported from the West. And communism, okay, especially in after 1917, when the first communist regime was established in Russia, so after USSR or Soviet Union was created, communism transported into was imported into Japan, and there are a lot of communists and anarchists, okay, and they believe that communism is the way to solve a lot of problems in Japan. And some of the Japanese communists even wanted to turn Japan into a communist country. Okay, of course, the Comintern or the Communist International. That's our international organization headquartered in Moscow. This is part of the Soviet Union's job to export revolution to the whole world. In the 1920s, the Soviet Union government, Joseph Stalin, sent agents to China to Taiwan, to Korea, to Japan, to all these East Asian countries, try to spread communist thought in all these countries. And there are many Japanese who converted to to communism, right? But these Japanese communists are suppressed by the imperial government. Some of them were executed for high treason during this time period. High treason means that you're disrespectful to the emperor. Yeah, if the court makes that ruling, you could be executed. Um, and if you criticize the emperor, that's not tolerated. Okay, it's absolutely not tolerated. Uh, you cannot criticize the emperor. If you could, a lot of socialists or communists they criticize the emperor. They say, "Hey, if you look at the imperial system, it's not good. We don't like that. Okay, we want equality of all people. Okay, we want a working class to rise up for a revolution. If you say this kind of words, you're in prison. You're in prison. Okay, and there's a secret police in Japan who make sure censorship is effective. Okay, censorship means that anything you publish, if you want to publish a book, publish a paper on newspaper, it must be censored. Okay, by the secret police. The secret police is screening all material that is published or to be published for any treason or any criticism of the emperor. All these are not allowed. Okay, very strict rule. Um, okay, next is the salaryman movement and white-collared women workers. These are the new rising middle class. Okay, these people they have some liberal thought. They're prone to liberal thought. Those ideas, Western ideas like freedom, liberal democracy, progressivism, equality are very attractive to the rising middle class, but they're weak. Japanese middle class is very weak under the imperial system. All right, democracy. Democracy. Um, After Meiji Restoration, lots of things changed. Unequal treaties that Japan had to sign were basically abolished, canceled in around 1900. Okay, remember the Harris Treaty that the Americans forced Japanese to sign. All these are abandoned. Okay, so this is a big victory for Japan. And not only that, in 1894 and 1895, Japan also defeated China in Korea and Manchuria. So this big victory brought a new colony for Japan. That is Taiwan. Japan took Taiwan, and also a huge war indemnity. China had to pay a huge money to Japan, and Japan used that money to modernize itself. So Japan definitely benefited greatly from warfare. So this formed a Japanese mentality. They thought war is a good thing. War is a good thing. Okay. So first they defeated China in 1895. They got Korea. They got Taiwan. They got a huge money from China that is equivalent for many years of a national revenue of Japan. Japan used that money to build a nationwide public school system and further modernize itself. Okay, and then second, Japan defeated Russia in 1904, right? So that also elevated Japan's national status. All the other European powers now they look at Japan as equal. Okay, so they benefited a lot from from warfare. The Russo-Japanese War, that means the war between Japan and Russia, also made Japan dominate China's Manchuria. Let me show you where that place is. Manchuria in northeast China. It's a huge fertile land, 6 times larger than Japan itself. So Japan benefited greatly from warfare. So the result is the rise of militarism. Japanese believe that war is a glorious thing. It's a beneficial thing. It's a profitable thing. Okay, there are all kinds of benefits coming from warfare, and what they should do is to continue to launch war again and again and again. Okay, until Japan become a larger and larger empire. So the war mentality. I would call that Japan's war mentality. Okay, Japan controlled Korea. So we talk about all these. And by the way, when Japan defeated the Russian Baltic fleet in the Russo-Japanese War, Japanese naval admiral Togo was praised by British as Nelson of the East. Okay, so Japan is officially treated as equal by European powers. Yeah. And then after the defeat of Russia, Japan also controlled Manchuria. Well, not legally. Okay, Japan had a stationing army in Manchuria, but the Chinese also, according to international law, also controlled part of Manchuria. So in Manchuria, there's a very complicated situation. Okay, Japan controlled the railroads. Japan has stationing army, more than 20,000 of them. And Chinese also had their own government and their own army in Manchuria. So it's a mixed up situation until 1931. We're going to talk about the 1931 incident later. So Japan gained Manchuria, Korea, and a southern Sakhalin Island. Okay, Sakhalin Island is, where is that on this map? Okay, here. Okay, look at this map. Yeah, so Japan controlled Sakhalin Island and other islands in this part of the Pacific Ocean after the 1904 war with Russia. Okay, but Soviet Union took back these northern islands in 1945 when Japan was defeated in World War II. So this is a territory change that you want to keep in mind. Okay, so before and after the Russo-Japanese War, Japan realized that they should ally with at least one European power. Okay, and they want to ally with someone they would not have direct competition for territory for, and that is Britain. Right? Japan cannot ally with Russia because Japan had to compete with Russia for Mongolia and Manchuria and perhaps China in general, right? So Japan cannot ally with Russia. So so your enemy's enemy could be your friend. So they found a competitor of Russia, that is Britain. So in 1902, there was Japan and Britain signed a treaty to become sort of a ally. And this alliance worked out in World War One, because in World War One, Japan joined the side of the Allies on the British and French side. They declared a war against the German Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, to the west, Japan had a competition with the United States. Okay, because geographically, Japan is located right in between the United States and China. Right, so if Japan wanted to expand into the continent, it will got into direct conflict with the United States. Okay, and also United States and Japan are located on the two sides of the Pacific Ocean. If anyone wants to control the Pacific Ocean or the Asia Pacific in general, Japan and the United States will have to get into a conflict. And also Japan's attempt to dominate China violated American interest in China. Okay, starting from early 20th century, America's basic policy towards China is the so-called open door policy. Okay, remember this term, open door policy. What that means is that America don't want any country to dominate China alone. No matter it's Russia, Japan, or British, doesn't matter. America wants a China that is open up to all countries, especially the United States, of course. So for that reason, America would not tolerate China become the colony of any other power. So this is so-called American open door policy. But Japan wants to control China alone. So this is in direct conflict with the American interest in China. So this is the long term. This is the long term origin for World War II. World War II. Eventually, this competition for China became triggered. It triggered uh, the attack on Pearl Harbor. So you have to understand this. China really is the focal point. Is the focal point. Japan has been competing with the United States. But what's interesting is that when Japan looked at America, they Japan actually learned a lot from America actually in 1920s and 30s, including baseball. Right? You know, baseball is probably the most popular sports in Japan even up to today, and that's thanks to the cultural influence from America. Right? A lot of the Japanese traveled and studied in the United States, and they brought back the culture, right? And jazz music is also something Japan learned from United States. But of course, some Japanese criticize American jazz as morally depraved, as a corrupt form of art because it's all about consumerism, it's all about individualism, it's all about the leisure, right? You only think about is self-centered, right? But instead, those some Japanese thought they needed different kinds of music. Okay, they needed music that arouses national pride. Uh, they needed music that arouses a self-sacrificing spirits to die for the nation, to die for the emperor. That kind of music. Okay, militaristic music, not the jazzy. Okay, jazz is not militaristic. Okay, so yeah, so that's China and Japan. Okay, World War One. Well, World War One broke out in 1914 in Europe. At first, a lot of East Asian people thought World War One has nothing to do with them. Actually, they did not even call it the World War One because when World War One happened, who would know that this is World War One? Nobody would know, right? Right? Because only after World War II you realize that the first Great War was World War One. So nobody thought this was World War One or World War One happened. So that's the irony of history. Actually, East Asian people call it the Great European War. They did not even call it the Great War. They did not even call it the World War. Okay, because for many Chinese, Japanese, that's a European war. Okay, the European powers are just killing each other. Okay, they were indeed killing each other actually. Um, so when this war broke out, this gave East Asian countries a great opportunity to develop themselves economically because there's a lot of orders from Europe. The European countries are so busy engaging in the war, they needed more supplies from all over the world, right? They needed all kinds of supplies, clothing, right? The military equipments and other products, commodities from Japan, from China. So this really boosted Japan's economy. So there was a booming economy. Economy is booming in World War One. Japan exported lots of textiles and other products to European countries. Okay, European countries are buying and buying and buying. So this has stimulated the Japanese economy. So this is a great thing for for Japan. Japan also joined the war due to a British request. Remember, in 1912, there was alliance between Japan and Britain. So Japan joined the war on the Allied side against Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But the problem is Germany is too far away, right? Japan cannot send armies to Europe to fight because Europe it's not needed. But Japan did find a German colony in China that is called Qingdao. I will show you where that is. This peninsula is called China's Shandong Peninsula, and on the tip of the peninsula, there is a city called Qingdao over here. Okay, if you zoom in, you will see where that is. Qingdao is the German colony in China. Okay, so although this is a Chinese city, but since China is bullied by uh, European powers like Germany could just occupy the city, and then they would practice a colonial rule in there. Okay, the German government is the only legitimate government in the city of Qingdao, and the German there's a small German army guarding the city. Okay, so when World War One broke out, um, when World War One broke out, Japan attacked this German colony in Qingdao and easily took it because there was only hundreds of German soldiers there. So they took that city, and the Japanese said, "Okay, so this is how we fight against Germany. We took their city, we turned that into a Japanese colony." Okay, so that's what Japan did. Pretty much, Japan is copying the imperialistic activities done by the European powers before. Japan also attacked the some other German overseas colonies in the South Pacific during the war. During the war. Okay, and then also in 1915, when the other European powers are so busy with the Great War in Europe, uh, very few European powers are paying attention to China. So this gave Japan a chance to control China. So in 1915, Japan sent a so-called the 21 demands to to the Chinese government in Beijing. This these 21 demands pretty much is trying to turn China into Japan's colony entirely. Okay, they want to turn the Chinese government in Beijing at the time it was the Yuan Shikai regime into a puppet state of Japan. And Japan wanted China to become Japan's sort of a semi-colony by requesting Chinese government only hire Japanese as advisors to their government. China cannot hire any other Americans or Europeans to be their advisor, and China cannot welcome American companies to invest in China. China must refuse European companies to invest in China. China can only welcome Japanese companies to invest in China. Okay, of course, this is a violation of Chinese sovereignty. So basically, Japan is copying everything Americans have done to Japan, what Matthew Perry has done to Japan. Japan is doing that to China. As we mentioned before, the little boy that used to be bullied in the playground is becoming the big bully himself. Okay, um, and then when the Bolshevik when the communist revolution broke out in Russia, um, Japan joined the international military intervention against USSR. This happened in late 1910s and early 1920s. Japan sent army into Russia's Siberia. If you look at this kind of off the map, but this is Russia's. This is a U.S. Soviet Union's Siberia. So in 1920, Japan sent army to to Siberia in this part, right? But it's very difficult to travel all the way to the European part of USSR. So Japan eventually gave up, but Japan did try to test the Russians, USSR's response. Okay, so after the Great War ended in Europe in 1918, Japan has become one of the powers equal to Britain, France, U.S., and Italy. Right, these are the winning countries in World War One. Germany and Austria, they were the losers, so they were punished. But the winners are Britain, France, United States, Italy, and Japan. And Japan. So in 1919, there was this international conference at Versailles. At Versailles, this is the place this town near Paris in France. The Versailles Conference in Paris is the conference by the winning states to decide how you're gonna treat with the losers. Okay, um, so Japan elevated its own international status in the Versailles Conference. Okay, Japan was given everything, all the privileges Germany had in East Asia. Okay, all the German privileges in East Asia were given at this conference to Japan, including the Chinese city of Qingdao. and other German overseas colonies in the South Pacific. They were all given to Japan. So Japan really got a lot uh, from what the Germany left. Okay. And also at the Versailles Conference, and in the years after that, there was a international organization established, and that is called the League of Nations. The League of Nations. League of Nations is a predecessor of the United Nations. United Nations we see today is established after World War II, but after World War One, many countries thought it's necessary to have an international organization that is called a League of Nations to to mediate the disputes or conflicts between nations. They thought this is more reasonable because in order to avoid another Great War, you need a sort of an international organization to mediate all the disputes between the nations. Okay, so the League of Nations was established. League of Nations, Japan got a permanent seat in the Council of the League of Nations, and that's a very important. That's a very important position. Okay, this picture, this interesting picture, was taken before World War One. Actually, this picture was taken during the so-called Boxer War in China in 1900. In 1900, there was a rebellion in China. A lot of peasants called Boxers. They launched this rebellion to kill foreigners, including Europeans and Japanese. So all these countries they militarily intervened in China's rebellion. They all sent an army to Beijing to crack down the rebellion. So in Beijing, a photo was taken, and because all these countries all sent their troops in China in Beijing, so it's for the first time in world history, it's possible to take a photo, take a picture of all these different soldiers from the world. I don't know why they arranged the line based on the body's height. So you have a British guy and an American guy standing on the left. And then as the heights gets lower and lower, eventually you got Japan. Okay, the Japanese are still kind of shorter than most European people. So but in this Boxer War, Japan declared to the whole world that itself is a power, is a power equal to all these European countries, right? So this is a very interesting photo. Um, and then in World War One, Japan took Qingdao. This is a photo taken in Qingdao. It shows how Japanese troops took that city. And this cannon gun is made in Germany. It's made in Germany. It's a typical German big cannon gun, and it was captured by Japanese. So after the war, in after World War One, Japan proposed a racial equality bill at the League of Nations. Okay, what they want is the following: they want the equality of nations being a basic principle of the League of Nations. Okay, they want to be so basically Japan want to be treated equally by European powers. The high contracting parties agreed to accord as soon as possible to all alien nationals as nationals of states members of the League equal and just treatment in every respect, making no distinction either in law or in fact on account of their race of nationality. So basically, what they want is that they want a purely equal treatment of all nations and people. Okay, well, this looks good. This sounds good, but Japan is actually violating its own imperialistic principle by proposing this bill, because Japan itself is not treating its own East Asian neighbors as equal. What about Taiwan? What about Korea? Right? What about China? Right? But Japan probably thought Taiwanese and Koreans are now Japanese, just like Okinawa people are now Japanese now. So they want to expand their empire. Okay, but by expanding the so-called Japanese empire, they still wanna being treated equally by European powers. So Japan made this proposal in the League of Nations. But this proposal was rejected. Was rejected. Uh, the the power that rejected this proposal was Britain. Yeah, Britain cannot accept this proposal because in 1918, oh yeah, I'm sorry, this is 1919. In 1919, Britain had so many colonies all over the world. Right? At this time, British Empire is called the empire in which you never see sunset. Remember, right? British Empire in early 20th century is the empire in which you will never see the sunset. What does that mean? It has so many colonies all over the globe that that at least one part of the colony, one colony would see the sun. It will never see the sunset. So having so many colonies, British Empire cannot tolerate equality of all nations. It just doesn't work for British Empire. If a British Empire was going to accept this proposal, that means all the colonies would have to be treated equally, and that's not possible. So British said Japan's proposal cannot be accepted, and the British government also forced the American government, President Woodrow Wilson. Well, actually, Woodrow Wilson is the person that pushed the idea of League of Nations the most. Woodrow Wilson used to be a Princeton University professor, and then he later became the president of the United States, and then he led the movement towards the League of Nations. So Woodrow Wilson is afraid that Britain would withdraw from the League of Nations. So Woodrow Wilson sided with the British, and they both said no to Japan's proposal. So Japan's proposal was denied. Okay, so when this proposal is denied, this further reinforced Japan's belief that Western racism against Japan is getting worse. Is getting worse. So Japan feel even more humiliated, right? So you, on one hand, you see that Japan has become this great power in East Asia, militarily, economically, right? But on the other hand, Japan thought they're humiliated by the West more and more, increasingly. Okay, so eventually this led to more challenge that Japan posed to the Western presence or existence in East Asia. This is the origin of World War II. We're going to talk about this later. And now, on the other hand, Japan, this in 1920s, Japan suffered a huge earthquake. Kendo, this is called the Kendo earthquake because it happened in the Kendo area in the Honshu Island. It resulted in more than 200,000 deaths in Japan. We know that Japan is located on between the earth plates, between the Pacific Ocean earth plate and the Asian continent earth plate. So the two earth plates are crashing into each other, making a lot of earthquakes in Japan every year. And every year there are thousands of earthquakes in Japan. Sometimes they cause a tsunami. Actually, tsunami is a Japanese term. That means an earthquake in under the sea causing a tsunami, flooding the city. Right. This is because Japan has so many tsunamis, so we use the term tsunami to refer to the natural phenomena. But also Japan suffer earthquakes. A huge earthquake would strike Japan every 20 years. I mean, every 20 years there's a huge earthquake that strikes Japan, like this one in the 1920s. So. And also combined with the shortage of natural resources, all these made Japan believe that they should expand. They should find a more living space. Okay, this is about the survival of the nation. Okay, because those islands are just not habitable. They're not suitable for for humans to live. So they want to move to the continent. Okay, they want to expand to the continent. So to find a more living space for the Yamato nation. Okay, so that's the idea. 1921, a Washington Navy Treaty, a naval treaty, was signed between Japan and the United States. So basically, this treaty makes sure that the two competitors, United States and Japan, to limit the number of battleships they can build. Okay, this naval treaty prescribes that the the ratio of naval power between Britain, US, and Japan should be at 5 to 3. So that means if Britain has if this means if Britain has 5 battleships, US have 5 battleships, then Japan could only have 3 battleships. So this is basically a limitation on the arm race, okay? Because these three countries don't want to, just unlimitedly expand their naval power. That would be too much. That will consume too much resources. So they want to limit the size of their navies. Okay. The U.S. also realized that Japan is a challenger. U.S. realized Japan is always a rising new power that trying to break the balance of power in the Asia Pacific region. U.S. know that Japan is a threat. In 1924, there is a U.S. immigration law to ban immigrants from East Asia, mostly Chinese, but now it extends to Japanese. Well, actually, the Americans already had a law to ban Chinese immigrants to United States in the 1880s. In 1882, there was this Chinese Exclusion Act to ban Chinese from coming into the United States. But now in 1924, there was more law to ban Japanese from coming to the United States. So in other words, it's a racism. It's a racism against East Asian people. Okay, so in the 1920s, last thing I want to mention is the rise of the so-called Zaibatu. Zaibatu. Okay, here. What Zaibatu mean? Zaibatu means military industrial complex. Okay, the famous Japanese companies like Mitsubishi, Mitsui, yeah, Sumitomo, right? All these are huge Japanese companies that have a strong connection with the government. Okay, on one hand, they are manufacturing automobiles for civilian market, but on the other hand, they're making battleships, they're making tanks, they're making airplanes, they're making fighters for the army, for the navy, for the Japanese navy and army. Okay, in the United States, we have a similar military industrial complex, right? For example, the what's that called? Yeah, there are a couple of the U.S. companies that like the Boeing, right? Boeing. On one hand, they're manufacturing airplanes for the general market, but on the other hand, they receive orders from U.S. government to make the most advanced jet fighters. So these companies are called military industrial complex. They're guaranteed by the government. Okay. These Zaibatu become larger and larger. Eventually, they become monopolies. Monopolies means the players in the market that have no competitors. Okay, because their connection with the government made sure guarantees their monopoly. These are called Zaibatu. They hire hundreds of thousands of employees, and they treat those employees like masters treat a samurai in the pre-modern time. This is very interesting about Japanese companies. Japanese companies, on one hand, are super efficient. Okay, people work really hard. Okay, the workers work really hard, very efficiently, very diligently. But on the other hand, it's very hierarchical. Okay, they transform the old samurai culture into the business. Okay, in those Zaibatsu and also in today's Japanese companies, they do this as well. The company would treat the workers like the old feudal lords treat their samurai. Okay, on one hand, I take care of you. Okay, but on the other hand, you have to be loyal to me 100%. For example, If a newly college graduate found a found a job in Mitsubishi, okay, making cars, okay, the expectation is that you join our company at the age of 22, fresh from college. The company will take care of you, okay. We'll give you pretty good benefits and everything, and we try our best not to fire you, even when the economy hit a bump, okay. So that's the obligation that the old feudal lord would have to summarize. But on the other hand, the company expects you not to find other jobs. Okay, you have to be totally loyal, 100% loyal to the company. If you try to betray the company uh, by, say, selling the information to another company or go to another company, that's considered as betrayal. This is just like you basically become a Iranian, okay? You become a masterless samurai. Everybody will despise you, okay? Despicable, absolutely despicable, okay? So as a result, the employees would work really hard for the company. This is why the death rate of overworking in Japan has been the highest. Okay, if you look at the rate of people who die for working too hard for their company since the 1960s, is always the highest around the whole world. So Japanese people are really, really like a work bee. They work really hard. Okay, so in those Zaibatsu, the Zaibatsu sort of reinforces this system. Okay, because of the monopoly they established with the help from government. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening because of the Zaibatsu. Okay, the Zaibatsu is accumulating a lot of wealth on themselves. They have a very strong say in the government because the navy and army, they heavily rely on Zaibatsu for providing military supplies and equipments. So Zaibatsu is becoming more and more powerful. They not only have a strong connection with the military force, they also have their lobbies in the parliament or the national assembly. Okay, so the Zaibatsu is a big problem for Japanese society, and the Zaibatsu tycoons. Okay, tycoons means powerful people. Okay, the big shots. The Zaibatsu huge company CEOs, right? These people are so-called Zaibatsu tycoons. They could control to a certain degree the politics, right? Because they want to launch war. Okay, if there's more war, that means more orders from the government and army. They could sell more to the military, so that they could make more money. So the military industrial complex are warmongers. Okay, these are warmongers. Okay, in 1945, after Japan surrendered in World War II, the American occupation government, led by General Douglas MacArthur, is trying to disassemble the military industrial complex in Japan. They try to do this. They try to disassemble. They try to destroy the Zaibatsu. They want to create a more fair and equal market in Japan, but it failed because of Korean War. We're going to talk about this because when Korean War broke out in 1950, American Army needed supplies, manufactures, products from Japanese Zaibatsu. So MacArthur eventually gave up the plan to disassemble the Japanese Zaibatsu. So the Zaibatsu is still there today. Okay, a lot of huge companies in Japan. Okay, Mitsubishi is still there. Okay, all right. Uh, and then in the later part of the Taisho period and early parts of the Showa period, Showa is Emperor Taisho's son. Okay, also when Taisho dies, Emperor Showa was enthroned. He became the emperor. This happened in the 1920s. During this time period, there was a militarization of the Japanese society. Okay, uh, because of the Zaibatsu military industrial complex, because of the inculcation of samurai culture in ordinary people, including the imperialistic expansionist ideology that is spreading, the Japanese society is quickly militarized. What does this mean? Is that all social resources are directed into developing military. Okay, at a certain time, more than 50% of national budgets were given to the military to build more tanks, make more machine guns, to make more battleships. And ordinary children, even elementary school children, were trained, have to receive military training. Okay, they were taught how to use rifle, how to set up landmines, how to use grenades. Because the idea is that all these children are future samurai in the military. Okay, they're gonna join the Great East Asian War against the white man. Because Japan's moral duty is to kick out all the Europeans, Americans, and the white men, all the Caucasians out of Asia, to turn Asia into Asian people's Asia. They're gonna lead China, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, perhaps even India, all these Asian countries. Japan is gonna be the center. Japan is gonna be the big brother to lead all these Asian countries to liberate them, to save them from the hands of the white man. And this takes a war. This takes a war. So they're training the next generation to prepare for a war. So this will end up our lecture today.